U.S. is threatening economic and other consequences if Russia invades Ukraine. President Biden spoke with Russian leader Vladimir Putin in a video call yesterday. Mr. Biden said he has deep concerns about Moscow building up its military presence at the Ukrainian border. U.S. intelligence has warned Russia could invade Ukraine as soon as next month. The president's national security advisor spoke yesterday about a potential invasion.
We still do not believe that President Putin has made a decision. What President Biden did today was lay out very clearly the consequences if he chooses to move. He also laid out an alternative path. Ultimately, we will see in the days ahead through actions, not through words, what course of action Russia chooses to take.
For more on yesterday's call with the Russian president, I want to bring back Ed O'Keefe. He is at the White House. So, Ed, how did things go? We talked about what we were hearing from the administration before, which was tough talk, lots of vagary. I hope vagary is a word. Were things much more specific? Was the talk tough? How did this conversation go?
Well, as Jake Sullivan put it, it was a useful meeting in that it allowed the two leaders to speak frankly and directly to each other about this situation and some other areas of concern, including cybersecurity, the Iranian nuclear talks, and other strategic concerns there in the former Soviet sphere, if you will. But they left the meeting with no better sense of whether or not Putin is indeed planning for a military invasion. Regardless, the U.S. made clear that the United States and its European allies are ready and willing to respond in bigger, bolder ways than they have in the past to this kind of aggression. And if Russia invades Ukraine, the response will be far sharper than it was back in 2014 when Ukraine invaded and then annexed the Crimea region from Ukraine.
U.S. officials have referenced potential consequences if Russia invades Ukraine. Can you explain what those are and what the intended effect would be for Russia?
We can't, because we don't know what specifically is being considered. Sullivan made very clear that they don't want to discuss it in public, but that the possibilities of what could be, what could happen are being conveyed to the Russians through Americans and European leaders as well. But look, it's obviously some kind of sanctions. And the general gist of it is that Russia would essentially be removed from the international economic space if they can convince enough European and Asian powers especially to cut them off in one way or another. The other bigger question perhaps here in Washington would be, does the United States, do the Europeans do anything regarding the ongoing construction of what's called Nord Stream 2, or a gas pipeline that's supposed to run from Russia into Europe to help fuel the continent during the cold winters. There has been talk here in the United States about possibly sanctioning Russia for its ongoing construction, but European leaders want to see that gas pipeline constructed because it is essentially allowing gas to get into Europe quicker and therefore at a less expensive rate. But even some European leaders apparently have told Americans that they understand that that pipeline may have to be reconsidered if Russia were to take such steps. So experts say watch to see what they do, what the Russians say in the coming days and weeks, and if they start to back off, it's a sign that the president's outreach this week and coordination with European leaders is working.
Speaking of European leaders, immediately following that conversation, the president got on the horn with several European allies. Do we know what they spoke about and what this says about the strategy? The fact that, we were told in the media that we're not going to hear anything yet because he's talking to European allies first.
Well, and it's the second call they had this week. There was one before the conversation with Putin and one almost immediately after. The president consulting with the leaders of the UK, France, Germany, Italy, handful of other European officials as well. The idea being that all of them want to stay on the same page, make sure they're singing from the same song sheet, so to speak, as they continue their engagement with Russia about possibly standing up to them should they consider military action. The other important thing to point out is Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, yesterday made clear that, and it's important to remember, there is a U.S. military presence in Eastern Europe as part of our obligations to NATO, but that could be increased or intensify should Russia take these steps.
All right, so let's pivot to domestic concerns. The president continues his roadshow, both figuratively and literally, because he's heading to Kansas City, Missouri, to promote his bipartisan infrastructure bill. That's why I call it a roadshow. He's going to be heading to the Transportation Authority there. He's already signed the bill, so why is he kind of still pushing it?
Well, with apologies to the old show tune, he's basically going to go to Missouri and say, look, everything isn't up to date in Kansas City. They haven't built as far as they could go, and the infrastructure bill is going to allow them to go farther and do more. Billions of dollars there for road construction, for public transportation projects, for water, sewage replacements and whatnot, and they understand that, or the president understands that he needs to go to those parts of the country, a predominantly Democratic city inside a Republican state, to say, your city's going to benefit from this, your state's going to benefit from this, and it's telling that he plans to meet with both Democratic and Republican officials in a state where he's not necessarily the most popular guy. But it's an attempt to explain and defend this in a part of a state and in a part of the country where it probably needs to be heard. And the White House understands that by going to those kinds of states and cities, support for the infrastructure legislation and for what Congress did can be sustained and perhaps potentially grow. But Quentin Lucas, who is the mayor of Kansas City, has been a big champion of this bill. He's a Democrat. Some say he might have statewide ambitions one day, so it doesn't hurt to be hanging out with the president today. The Republican governor, no big fan of the president, but going to be meeting with him today because he understands that this kind of investment by the federal government is good for the Show Me State.
It certainly is. The Supreme Court Commission, the Supreme Court Commission that President Biden created, specifically to look at sort of changes that could happen within the Supreme Court. They have a report. It's ready to be delivered to the president. What are the big takeaways?
About a 200-page report that was written by 34 experts across the country, liberal, Democrat, down the middle types, with opinions on what exactly to do about the future of the Supreme Court at a time when public opinion of it is at a record low. The commission didn't make any formal recommendations, but essentially grazed the landscape, laying out the arguments for and against things like potential term limits on Supreme Court justices, enacting a code of ethics, supporting the continued live audio streaming of arguments, like last week when they heard the case regarding Mississippi's abortion law. But there are no recommendations in this report, and it admits there is big disagreement over whether or not the Supreme Court should be expanded to include more justices. Liberals in the Democratic Party, those on the far left, big supporters of doing so, arguing that Republicans have co-opted the court in recent years, allowed the confirmation of 3 conservative justices who may be on the verge of doing things like chipping away at the Roe v. Wade abortion rights precedents. The president, the former chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, not expected to spend much time reading this report or even thinking about the Supreme Court. This was merely designed to assuage the concerns of people in his own party who say there needs to be a conversation about this. And based on the document, there has been, and there certainly could be, but it would require congressional action, and we know how that normally goes.
Yeah, it goes slow, if at all. Ed O'Keefe, thank you very much.
Take care.